Have you been experiencing an uneasy feeling about the modern church? Do you sense that there is something very wrong within the body of believers? Have you found yourself questioning the things that you've been taught about Scripture? Are you bothered by a nagging sense that much of what you were taught is lacking or worse, wrong? Do you feel lost? Are you looking for more? If you've been experiencing any of these feelings, you are among friends here. We felt the same way at one time. We can relate to the prophet Jeremiah when he wrote, "Our fathers have inherited nothing but lies, worthless things in which there is no profit." This is Jeremiah 16:19. We, too, felt lost until we started tearing down the teachings and traditions of man and started to study Scripture for ourselves. And in its original, ancient Near East, Torah-observant Hebrew context. When we started to study Scripture in its ancient context, our faith started to change. We came alive, and we found ourselves drawn back to the ancient paths. This is what Yahweh says: stand by the ways and seek and ask for ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it. Then you will find a resting place for your souls. But they said, we will not walk in it. This is Jeremiah 6:16. The Scriptures call this ancient path the way. This show is dedicated to serving the kingdom of Yahweh by sharing what we have learned about the way with others. We are aware that there are many other voices out there making similar claims. We just feel that many of those voices are seeking something other than to serve the kingdom, and that they do nothing but cause more confusion as a result. We make no claim to special revelation or anointing. We just try to avoid adding to the confusion by focusing on the Father, His Son, and their kingdom. We are lay people, but we are not without the necessary skills to do proper research. We do believe that Torah still applies to the believer, but we are not part of the Hebrew Roots movement. In fact, most Hebrew Roots groups would reject us. This is because we recognize that Torah is more than just the law of Moses. We are under the new covenant, and with a change in the covenant, there was a change in the way Torah applies to the believers. Search the Scriptures and pray for the wisdom necessary to better understand how the covenant has changed and how these changes govern the way Torah is to be applied to the life of the believer. Then, we try to live, as best we can in our modern world, according to these changes described and lived out by the Messiah and his apostles. And in everything we do, we strive to serve the Father, His Son, and their kingdom by serving other believers and helping to make stronger disciples as we go. Good morning. Welcome to We Who Are Lost. Today is Wednesday, August 5th, 2026. I'm your host, Joe Bakanovic. Before we get going with today's show, Charlie, pop on here for a minute, would you? Do you remember when we were talking about the earthquakes and the volcanoes and all this stuff just a couple days back?
Uh-huh.
Did you notice what happened yesterday?
No, we've been having all sorts of stuff going on lately.
Guatemala had a volcano erupt, a pretty good eruption too. Have you noticed that almost not a day's gone by since we mentioned that without a sizable earthquake or volcanic activity somewhere?
Yeah. That and the wildfires are going like gangbusters,
and I know people will say, well, it's always happened this way, but we're just now reporting it. The problem is we have records that tell us.
Well, yeah, and I did a little bit of research on this because I was, thinking about trying to.
Oh, we also have a solar storm we're in the middle of.
Yeah, but from what I understand, earthquakes, they're not necessarily more than we've had, because there's a debate on whether there's actually more if we just have better seismic, stuff. But overall, I did find several articles that said overall natural disasters overall have been increasing tremendously over like the last 10, 15 years. I mean, the graph just goes. So overall,
together, like birth pains. Sailor Sun has a better song now. Rather than In the Ghetto, I like this one. CCR is A Bad Moon Arising is now ringing over Elvis. Yes, I'm with him there. There we go. I see trouble on the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and then
So
that earthquake that was in the Middle East just a couple days ago, that is exactly where the longest solar eclipse that we're going to have this century will pass over in
yeah,
a
you said,
year or two
yeah,
here.
saw that. I don't
Yeah.
know if it was in the signal chat or where, but yeah, I remember you saying
That's
something
not
about
a
that.
significant part of the world. I
No,
mean, that earthquake was in Sinai.
there's nothing to see here. Move along. These are not the droids you're looking for.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the meat of today's show. As I said in the introduction to this show, or the show description, I have spent the better part of the last 20 years studying the Old Testament. New Testament as well, yes, but I've studied the Old Testament. And I have spent a great deal of my time and effort trying to understand the culture, the ancient Near East, Hebrew, Torah observant Hebrew culture. And this is because that's the context from which our Old Testament scriptures are derived. That's where they spring out of. That's where I started to understand that the Old Testament was written for me, but not to me. Well, the New Testament's the same way. And as of late, I am feeling very strongly drawn to the New Testament. So I guess 20 years of studying the Old, I'm not an expert. I'm not even coming close to claiming that. I got a lot left that I want to know. But I think I have enough of a foundation under me that the Spirit's moving me along, saying, okay, time for the New Testament, Joe. So we're going to be moving in that direction for the foreseeable future. But me being me, and the way I've been trained and the way I've learned to do things, I have to understand the context of the New Testament. And I don't just mean Jeremiah and the promise of the new covenant. I mean the context of the world in which the New Testament is written. So before diving into the New Testament, that's what I go looking at, the context. Because that context is going to help me, it's going to explain and help me understand how the Messiah was received, why people react to him in the Gospels and in the certain way they do, and why these problems that Paul and the other apostles are dealing with in their pastoral letters, where those problems come from, how they arose. It's going to help me better understand why they were looking for the warrior king and not the suffering servant and the humble lamb, and why his gospel might have been rejected by the Jews, et cetera, et cetera. So I start with the intertestamental period, basically the Second Temple period, after the house of Judah returns from Babylon. Now, from that point forward, there are prophecies that tell us Judah will not forget their way again. They will stay with Yahweh. That doesn't mean they're going to do it perfectly. It means they're going to remember who he is. It doesn't mean that they're not going to change his Torah or alter it or add to it. It doesn't mean that they're perfect obedient. But they have remembered. They have not gone off worshiping the Baals. They don't worship Moloch. They don't go after Ashtoreth or Ishtar, any of that stuff anymore. Orthodox Judaism has remembered who their Elohim is. That's a fulfillment of prophecy. So this intertestamental period is roughly 400 years. Now, why is that important? Well, it's not necessarily important, but does it ring a bell with you? That's roughly how many years the house of Israel was, the Jacob, all of Israel was in Egypt as a captive. 30 years, he was there 430 years. Well, 30 years they were there as a guest, until Joseph died and a new Pharaoh came along that didn't recognize or remember Joseph. So there's a parallel or a pattern here. And this 400 years is a time of great changes. It's a time of strife and yearning, and it leads to a sense of despair amongst Yahweh's people. And that sets the stage for the Messiah. So what happens in this 400-year period? I'm just starting to get into this. And from what I understand, it's time for me to read Josephus, because apparently most of what we know of this period comes from Josephus and the rabbis. But most of what we know about the history of this period comes out of Josephus. who wrote the history of the Jews. So I know from what little cursory work I've started to do that this period, the Second Temple period, this period of what's called the silent years, although they're not silent, it's silent in prophecy. The prophets quit. There's a lot being written in this period, but none of it is thus saith Yahweh. So what happens is we're going through a period where it's the end of the classical ancient Near East culture and or tradition. And I didn't just say Hebrew. I said ancient Near East cultural tradition, where it's going to go through a period of Hellenization and Roman rule. Now, I am still at odds with the idea that I know everybody thinks of Rome as a different beast or ruling over the Middle East, and I'm not entirely sure whether that's the way I should look at that or not. You know, the legs of iron in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I don't know that I should look at it that way. You can look at it any way you want, but there are thighs. There are two thighs. So that's the gold head, silver arms and chest, arms, Medo-Persia. Well, the bronze thighs, well, there are two of those, or copper or whatever. You have two thighs. Well, there was not an East and West Greece, but there is a Greco-Roman Empire, and that's how history records it, Greco-Roman. And that's because the eastern half of the Roman Empire never really quit being Greek. Okay, it never really became Rome. So I'm not sure how I should look at this, but I do know that Hellenistic Greek influences are going to radically change the culture of the Middle East in this 400-year period of time. For instance, Israel is no longer a nation. The nation of Israel is no more at this period of time. What you have is Judea, and it's just a minor territory. It's a region. And then what happens is after the Persian rule crumbles, Cyrus and Medo-Persia, we don't know a whole lot about that. It's very likely that Judea was allowed to do its own thing rather benevolently, because Cyrus supported them and helped build up the Jerusalem and the temple again and everything. But what we have then is the Greeks come into play. And after Alexander dies and the Greeks split up into four different kingdoms, four different rulers, Alexander's generals, Ptolemies and somebody else, I don't remember. Let me see if I can find it real quick. The Persian rule, the Greek influence, and the Seleucids and the Ptolemean kingdoms here. The Seleucids, I think, are in Egypt, and that Ptolemeans are in Egypt, and the Seleucids are in Syria. It doesn't matter. What it does is it leads to the Maccabean revolt, and that's going to win the area of Judea's independence for a short period of time. But in this period is where we end up with Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And that name and title means God made manifest. So in a lot of ways, he is a man who takes the seat of Yahweh, God, and says that he's God, elevates himself above all else. And he puts a statue of Zeus or Jupiter or whatever in the temple and slaughters a pig in the temple, which is just absolute abomination to the house of Judah. And he, in a lot of ways, fits the prophecies from David. I mean, not David, Daniel about, and he kind of fits what we see in 2 Thessalonians and the Antichrist and all this stuff that, we discussed yesterday. So people would have seen it that way at that time. Now, that does not mean that he is not what the prophets were talking about. He probably was. the physical manifestation, but that does not mean that there will not be a later manifestation of this prophecy, even a spiritual one. And we'll get to why that's important to think about in a minute. So Antiochus Epiphanes IV, he tried to eradicate Judaism. He ordered the burning of the Torah scrolls and all of this. He ordered the Jews to worship his gods and all this other stuff. He was killing people, desecrates the temples. It leads to the Maccabees in the Maccabean revolt, which is pretty much led by one man, elderly man, and I think it's his 5 sons. They're all killed. But the Maccabean revolt does get rid of Antiochus and the Greek rule. It's a 24-year-long revolt. It takes a while, but it freed Judah until Rome comes along. Rome comes along at 63 BC or whatever. But there's a period of time there where Judea has been allowed to live on its own. Rome takes over, and they take over in an act of sacrilege. There was a siege of Jerusalem, of Israel and Judea and Jerusalem. And when they take Jerusalem, when they find, 3 years, they finally take it. They slaughter a bunch of the priests during a time of, I guess, feasts or whatever. But whatever it is they do, I haven't read this in great detail. I read the intro in my New Testament, in the intertestamental period explanation. And I know that whatever this is that the Romans did, and I'll find out more detail, it sets the Jews off. The Jews gain an immediate hatred of Rome, like right then, boom, done. So this is the world into which the Messiah enters. He enters into the culmination of this world. Now, during this period, we also have a lot of writing being done. You have the Septuagint. That's the Bible, the Torah, being written in Greek, the Old Testament in Greek. And it becomes the Bible of the Jews, the house of Judah, throughout the whole world, except in Judea. In Judea, there's going to be a mix. Sometimes they read from the Septuagint. A lot of times they're going to read from the Hebrew Torah. So why is the Messiah reading from the Septuagint in Galilee? Galilee is not exactly under the control of Judea at that time, at the time of the Messiah. It's kind of like a cultural trade route, a center of trade hub. It's not very far from one of the ports on the coast directly. Let's see, Galilee, I guess it's north by northwest, but it's only like 12 or 13 miles. You can see one of the temples in this port from the mountains or the hills of Galilee. But they spoke a lot of different languages because a lot of different trade came through that area. But Greek at this time is going to be the language of commerce, much like English is the language of commerce today, international trade. So the Septuagint becomes important to Yahweh's people. The Apocrypha gets written as well. Now, the Apocrypha, we'll get to that probably on the 20th. We'll talk about that more when Brett Evans comes back and talks to us about where we get the canon. But what I have learned is that the Jews largely did not consider the apocryphal books to be canon in their day and age. That comes along with Christianity. The Christians accept a lot of the Apocrypha, and that is probably because of Gentile influence within the Christian church, the growing Christian church. And the Apocrypha isn't accepted as canon for at least 70, 80, 90 years into the early church. So it's toward the end of the 1st century where that becomes considered to be canon within Christianity. You're also going to have a lot of the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls by the Essenes. So all of this intertestamental period literature, especially the work of Enoch. There's 1st Enoch, 2nd Enoch, 3rd Enoch, 4th Enoch. The Enochian material is a collection of writing. But a lot of this writing in this period of time is apocalyptic in nature. Okay, it reflects the strife that's going, the spiritual and political struggles of the Jews, the house of Judah, at this period of time. I've also learned that, according to what I was reading in my study Bible, The diaspora is accelerating in this period. This 400-year period, there are still people fleeing Judea. The northern kingdom's already dispersed, but there are a lot of people from Judea, Jews, fleeing into the different parts of the world, so that it gets to a point where it can be rightly written that there are Jews in every nation on earth. And there will be Hebrews from the northern kingdom, Israelites in every nation on earth, but they won't be known as Israelites. If you're studying Alan's book, The Scepter and the Birthright, with us on Fridays, you already know how this works. So now, in this period, we have the rise of several religious groups. This is where we get the Sadducees. They're aristocratics, and they become the temple party. At the same time, because of the diaspora, we have the rise of the synagogue. And this starts with the return from Babylon. The move from corporate, communal, temple, physical, mounted, religious, communal, to individual, from physical worship to inner spiritual worship. Now, that's important, folks, because that's essentially kind of like where the new covenant lives. So hold on to that. But this move continues, this change within the way the Jews saw their worship. It leads to the synagogue, to the creation of synagogue worship. And the synagogue starts to become the focus of worship within the community instead of the...
Did we lose YouTube? It seems like it refreshed okay right now. Let me check and see where we're at.
Aaron, Mr. Spikes, can you hear me on Facebook? JMW says we're good on Rumble. Ms. Boatwright says we're back on YouTube.
It looks like YouTube is having some issues, because like when I refresh it, it doesn't auto play. I have to click play again. So, I mean, and they probably can't hear me if they're locked up, but you may have to periodically refresh your screen. It looks like there's something going on with YouTube, but all right. So that's the best I know at this point.
Apologies for the interruption, folks, but we have no control over YouTube. So where I was is that during the Babylonian exile, worship of Yahweh starts to move from the communal, temple, ritualistic type of physical worship toward a personal, more private form of worship, and it leads to the start of synagogue, where the synagogue becomes the focus of communal worship in a community. It takes the place of the temple wherever the house of Judah is in the world. Wherever the Jews are, they put up a synagogue, and that becomes the focus of where worship is conducted and everything. And it starts to replace the temple over time. And this is the change from personal piety instead of national piety. And then you have the Essenes. They're going to be caught up. The Pharisees, where the Sadducees are temple party, the Pharisees are the synagogue party. So they're going to be the party of the synagogue. And the Pharisees are going to support the idea that the synagogue can be the focus of worship within a community, as opposed to the temple for the focus of all of Yahweh's people. And the temple is national focus. You got to go to the temple 3 times a year. Whereas in the synagogue, I guess you would go to synagogue instead of the temple. So you see, there's already a change within how our worship is being conducted. And it starts to become more personal rather than nationalistic in its identity. Now, the Essenes, this is a cultic little group. They pull themselves out of all of this, and they're pushing the law. The Pharisees try to push the law, but they go so far as to create what they call a hedge around the law. They add to it so that you never come close to the edge of sinning against the law, because you're hemmed up by this hedge of their dictates. So where if it says, don't walk 500 feet on a certain day, they'll tell you don't walk 100 feet on that day to protect you from sinning. So they're trying to take the role of the Holy Spirit and make it so you can't possibly sin. The Essenes saw themselves as the true remnant. They were even more Torah observant and stringent on the Torah. The Sadducees only obeyed the first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's all they recognize. The Pharisees would accept the whole of the TaNaKH, which is the Old Testament. The Essenes, from what we see, kind of a little bit of a mix of both. There is some thought that possibly John the Baptist and Yeshua were of the Essene. It's a cult. It's a cult. So they're thinking the Essenes, that they may have been part of that cult or that group, that sect. There's no real evidence to suggest it. But the Essenes are where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls. They preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. And finally, we have Herod, King Herod. And we have to pay attention to King Herod because he's a big problem. He's a vassal of Rome. He's been put in place by Rome, and he's not a Hebrew. He's not a Jew. He's an Idumean. Idumeans are the Edomites, descendants of Esau, who are not, brother of Jacob, but not necessarily friends of Yahweh's people. Okay. And Herod is also, his father is an Edomite. His mother is a Nabatean or Nabateans. And when you trace that, you're going to get back to Ishmael. So Herod is of the lineage of Esau and Ishmael, more than likely. That's not a good thing with the Hebrews. That's no bueno. You know what I'm saying? So he breaks with the bloodlines, and this is going to cause, so you have somebody who's not of the throne of David on the throne in Judea, and the Jews have real trouble with this, and they're trying to find a way to get rid of him and restore proper rule. So you have, at the time the Messiah shows up, you have a sense that Yahweh has abandoned his people, and that your faith is in vain. Okay, if Yahweh broke his promises all this time, we're no longer Israel. He's abandoned us. He's not our Elohim anymore. Oh my gosh. And there's a bit of desperation in the population, the Hebrew or Jewish population of Judea. Then enter John the Baptist per Malachi, where Malachi says there will be one who comes and sets things straight and prepares everything for the Messiah. It's Isaiah, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, makes straight the path for the Lord, Yahweh. So John the Baptist shows up, and then the Messiah shows up. And this is the context of the world in which the Messiah enters. And this is going to have everything to do with the way the Messiah and his message, his gospel, is going to be received. He's going to come preaching. Well, we'll hold this for the second part of the show. But I want you to understand why all of this is important. Okay, we've got spiritual changes. And that should be understood, that there's a spiritual change coming, because Jeremiah promises that the new covenant's going to be different than the old. Very different. You're not going to have the temple anymore, not the same way. The temple gets moved to the heart of the believer. So this move to the synagogues in toward individual worship rather than necessarily national worship, that's a change. And then you have a whole bunch of economic strife going on at this time. You have political changes, and you have a spiritual wandering. They feel lost, abandoned, unhinged from everything they thought they knew. In a lot of ways, Yahweh was working. I guess if you want to look at this politically, economically, yeah, you can dismiss all of this. That's just life. That's just the way the world works. But I don't look at it that way. I look at the whole play of human history as being under the influence of Yahweh's will. He works his will through what we're doing and how we do it. So for me, he was plowing and tilling. Yahweh was plowing and tilling the land and getting his people ready for the changes that were coming, and setting the political and economic situation or conditions so that when his Messiah shows up, those who are going to receive the true gospel message will hear it clearly and understand it and respond to it, and those who don't won't. So he sets up material world conditions that allows him to sift you spiritually. Why is that important? I think you're in a very similar situation right now. And it's been going on for 400 years. Because this American experiment of ours did not start in 1776. It started in the early 1600s. Add 400 years to that. You're almost at 400 to 430 year period again. So whether there's anything to that or not, I don't know. But I'm pretty good at pattern recognition. And why do I say this started in the early 1600s? Because it started when the Pilgrims came over. The Puritans and the Pilgrims and those groups. So that's when the history of this country starts, especially with the Pilgrims. It starts at Plymouth Rock. That's when the fulfillment of a lot of the prophecies for Ephraim started. So this is the world into which the Messiah enters. And I'll pick up from there when we come back from the bottom of the hour break. Got a 3-minute break. We'll be back as soon as that's over. Charlie? Okay, I left off with the conditions, the spiritual, economic, political conditions of Judea, that little region, at the time the Messiah shows up, John the Baptist and the Messiah. The people are looking for the restoration of the physical nation of Israel. Now, you read John's gospel, the Caiaphas, the head Pharisee, he's when he suggests that they execute Yeshua, He wants to do that so the Romans won't remove what's left of Israel. The Judea won't remove the Pharisees and the Sadducees, destroy the temple, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't want to see what's left of the nation of Israel, how he's thinking destroyed. And he says, if we let Jesus continue, Yeshua continue, he's going to bring Israel back. He's going to bring all the people back. And then they'll lose their position. Well, he's thinking, I don't know what he was thinking. I'm not in his brain. But when you read that account in John, he might think he was worried about Israel, but it seems like he was worried about his position of authority and honor within the community. But the point is that he recognized that there are people yearning for Israel to come back. We also see the apostles. They ask him, is it at this time that you are going to restore Israel? Meaning not Judah, Israel, the divorced bride, the northern kingdom that has been cast out. They're not asking him, are you going to restore, the kingdom of Judah into a nation? They're asking him, are you going to bring the northern kingdom back home and put everything back together? Are you going to fulfill Ezekiel 37? But the Messiah doesn't address that right away. And that's because he didn't come to do this. The people, when the Messiah shows up, when he enters the scene, the people are looking to go backwards. They want to go back to they want to go back to King David and King Solomon, where Israel pretty much ruled the Middle East. That's what they want. They want to be the only world superpower, and they want those old days back. It's nostalgia going on here. But the kingdom of Yahweh, the Messiah comes preaching the kingdom of Yahweh. That is not a physical national kingdom. It's a spiritual kingdom. And not everybody's going to recognize this. The Messiah comes to ask us to move from physical national orientation and worship and everything of Moses to him, to the Messiah, to a spiritual kingdom. And a lot of people in that time can't make that change. A lot of people today still struggle with that change. They want a physical kingdom. Well, they're going to be reunited and everything eventually, like it was in the Garden of Eden before the fall. But it has always been the point. Since the fall, the point has always been spiritual first, then reflect in the physical. The heart changes, then your actions change. When you convince the mind and the heart that you're going to follow Yahweh and his Messiah's son, then the way you live, your fruit you'll bear fruit. So you have to have that conversion, that change inside you, and that's a spiritual change, before the physical reflections or the earth shadows can manifest themselves. And it's always been that way from the beginning. And the laws of Moses were meant to teach the people, do these things and that you'll be okay. But that didn't change the heart. You could have a pretender, a wolf in sheep's clothing, doing these things and still not be spiritually converted. So the Messiah comes to drive the Torah into the heart of the individual. It's like, okay, you didn't get it under Moses. Now let me really hammer it home. We'll put the spike on your heart and hammer it. Okay, there's the Torah. The spike is the Torah. Now it's inside you. Now can you live this? So the temple was house of Yahweh, the physical temple. Now the spiritual temple is the heart of the individual. The Messiah comes to explain and demonstrate all of this through the way he lives. And this is the heart of the Gospels. He's coming to bridge the gap from the old physical Israel national worship to the new global spiritual kingdom that regains everything. He's going to take back all the physical nations. Don't get me wrong. That's part of the gospel, but that's not the gospel. The whole of the gospel is the kingdom of Yahweh, which has been entrusted to Yeshua Messiah. It's been given to him. So he's going to rule. Well, when you rule, you issue decrees and ordinances, and you expect your citizens to follow them and to obey the king and be a good citizen of the kingdom or whatever, good subject of the king, however you want to put that. And that has to be understood in the heart of the individual believer and then transformed into physical actions. And there's a bridging going on here. This is going to go out into the world. The word, the Torah, the word, the gospel is going to go from Zion out into the world. And what we're doing now is the 400-year period set the stage to go from the Hebrew nationalistic snottiness of Israel out into the world, into all the nations. And I'm not going to say Gentiles here, because I'm more and more convinced I got to look at this with a Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Yes, Gentiles are included. I'm not excluding them. For all I know, I'm one of them. Okay. You get grafted in through Israel, the house of Israel, the divorced bride, the northern kingdom. So, but you got to get the messenger thinking and acting in a way that they'll at least be able to comprehend and communicate with the Greek. So that's what's going on in this 400-year period, is that Yahweh's people are becoming less and less Hebrew and more Hellenized. I didn't say Hellenistic. They're not becoming Greeks, but they become Hellenized, so that when Paul comes along, Paul tells you, I'm become all things to all people. In other words, I learn how to talk to you, and I can convey the gospel message to you in either in your language or in a way that you're going to understand. Because they don't abandon the core tenets of Torah or Yahweh and worshiping of Yahweh. That's never been abandoned. But that's very different. That monotheistic worship is very different from what the rest of the world has been, the polytheists. So that 400-year period is essentially training Yahweh's people, the house of Judah, the one who guards the word. The oracles of Yahweh have been entrusted to Judah. That's one of the prophets. So they've been guarding it, but now they have to learn how to communicate it to the non-Hebrew world. Well, that 400-year period, it plowed and planted and watered. And now the Messiah comes to show you how to do this. And he teaches to everybody, and he shows no impartiality. This is the world. This is the context. This is the environment into which we're going to enter next week when we start with the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels first. And synoptic just means seeing together, of one accord, one mind. They in agreement with each other. So we'll address, was one copy in the other. We'll get all of that next week, and probably look at Matthew first. I'm not going to go through this like a book study. It's not what I intend to do. That's not how I did my study of the Old Testament. I studied for concepts first. What are the primary main concepts that are being espoused in Matthew, and then in Mark, and then in Luke? What are those three gospel authors writing about, and why? What's their primary focus? And what should we pick up on from it? And how should we understand it? And what should it do for our understanding of the new covenant, and what's expected of us, and how to live it in the kingdom of Yahweh, and all this other stuff? So this is where I'm at. And for the next however long this takes, I'm just going to invite you to share and learn with me, because I'm going to be going through the New Testament, probably just Matthew to the end, but I'll go through it several times. This first time through, I'm looking for concepts. Basically, what is the new covenant? How does it affect Torah? What's expected of me now? How do I know? And how does it go from the nationalistic, temple-centered to the spiritual, individual heart of the believer-centered, more internalized? I want to look at these things, these big picture concepts. So that's the first time through where I'm going to go. And I'm going to be looking at the texts. And I'm not going to do a whole bunch of looking to, well, what's so-and-so tell me about this, and what's that commentator tell me about this new. I don't need that. The New Testament authors explain it to me using the Old Testament. I've spent a lot of time studying the Old Testament, so I'm going to be better equipped and better able to follow the New Testament authors as they explain the Old Testament to me, because I took time to understand the foundation. So now the house they're building on it, should be a little easier for me to comprehend and to apply it to my faith. So if you're studying along with me, that's where I'm going to be going. And I'll just invite you. I'll report back every week as I do this, because it's going to be my personal studies every week. That's where I'm going to be. As soon as I'm done with Genesis, I'm going to be moving this into our congregation. We've got to start paying attention to where we live today. We've got the foundation under us. I don't want to be like the Jews of the Messiah's time, waiting for Moses to be put back in place. The Messiah never said he was going to do that. He said he come to do the opposite, put the new covenant in place. How's it different? I know Torah hasn't been eliminated. He said not one jot or tittle of the law, but the Greek word is nomos. There is no Greek word for Torah unless you use logos. What? Yeah, there is a Greek word that covers the Hebrew concept of Torah, logos. So, Joe, I've looked that up. It means word. Oh, nay. Not to a Greek philosopher, it doesn't. To a Greek philosopher, it would mean the Torah of the Creator, his logic, his mind, his decrees, his ordinances, his laws. That's what logos would mean to a Greek philosopher. So when John says in the beginning was the logos, he was saying in the beginning was the Torah. And the Torah was with Elohim, and the Torah was Elohim. Concept study makes this very clear. Word study, you won't see it. Concept study, it's right in your face. Big, bright, flashing lights. So this is what I'm looking for. So when the Messiah says not one jot or tittle of the Torah will go away, that's not the law of Moses, folks. The law of Moses was part of the Torah at that time under that covenant. But what does the Torah teach us now? It's the same Torah of the Old Testament, the law and the prophets. The nomos and the prophets. There's no other word for law. Nomos, that's all the Greeks have, unless you use logos. And I believe John's the only one who uses that term. So what term would the Messiah use? He's got nomos. Well, you have to use context to understand what he's talking about. He didn't come to restore the law of Moses. Moses even told you that he would change it. There would be a greater prophet, greater than Moses. Jeremiah told us new covenant. So we're not putting the law of Moses back in place. So the Torah of the Father, Yahweh's Torah, has not gone anywhere and never will. So what's expected of us and how do we do it? That's what I need to know for my own personal world. I'm going to invite you into our studies as we do this. Charlie, I yield the floor.
Yeah. I think this will be beneficial as we go through here. It's going to take a while to actually start putting all the pieces together here, but I think in the end it'll be good, because that's exactly what we need to know is how do we live the Torah in today's society and culture.
Yeah.
And that's a good question. I don't know all the answers to that. So I'm interested in learning along with you. So
I don't think we're going to get all the answers.
We're not going to get all of them, but we should at least get
I'll be happy if we can get the outline.
Get like
the Roman numerals of the outline. 1, 2, 3. Maybe
like
A
you
and a
talk
B
about
here and there.
A lot of times we can get the vector, if you will, the direction we need to be going. We may not know exactly the path, but usually Yahweh, he'll point you in a direction, and you start, if you listen to him and you start walking in that direction, then he'll drop little breadcrumbs along the way to either let you know, yep, you're on the right place, or ooh, that was a sour piece of bread. Maybe I'm going the wrong way. So backtrack a few steps and reorient myself and try again. So,
by the way, I was getting ready for this show, doing the show prep. I was reading on Philo.
Yeah.
He's a Hebrew, Egyptian, Hellenistic Jewish philosopher. He mentions logos of God, the logos of the creator, logos of Elohim. And he says the number 3 represents the logos of Elohim. And when you read his description of logos, you got to be careful with him, because he's trying to blend Hebrew philosophy with Greek philosophy. So there's a little bit of syncretism going on in his thinking, but he's already talking about the Trinity. And he says the number 3 represents the concept of Trinity. He doesn't use the word Trinity, but he defines the concept clearly in his writings. The concept of Trinitarian is right there. And guess when he was writing, folks? He was writing while the Messiah was still alive.
Yep.
He starts writing 20 AD.
Yeah.
And his writing ends in 60 AD.
Yeah,
he is
Philo
a contemporary of the
Josephus, that's the records that we have as far as historical records, as best
now
I understand.
Philo has to be read carefully, and you need to have your scriptural defenses up. But Philo was trying to do exactly what Drew Johnson's been doing here in his book on biblical philosophy. Philo was trying to use the Bible as his compass, and Hebrew philosophy using Greek philosophical terms and structure, so that he could talk to the Hellenistic people about biblical ideas.
Right.
Problem was, I think Philo was a little too enamored with the Greek way of thinking. So
yeah.
he was skirting on the edge. Yes, he was skirting on the edge of Gnosticism.
Yeah.
But when you see what he was trying to do, there's value in what his thinking is. The point I bring this up for is that's the earliest direct mention to a Trinitarian definition that I've encountered yet in the time of the apostles and the Messiah.
Yeah.
And he was drawing from previous Jewish work. He's drawing from the Bible.
Yeah, because typically in earlier Hebrew works, they would discuss 2 Yahwehs, but the third kind of thing, I mean, you can find it earlier, but you got to really dig for it. Yes. But around Second Temple period is where it seemed to come closer into focus and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep. Which is setting the ground for the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit to be revealed, a further revelation.
Right.
Yes. So there we go. Anything else we need to cover?
I don't think so for today. This is a good
questions on the board, comments,
no questions on the board today, at least not that I saw. And sorry about the YouTube issues. Hopefully it's doing better, but that's why we have all the different platforms, so that if one of them's messing up, you can change to one of the others and hopefully be able to pick it up and keep running. So
it is my sincere desire that if you're with us today, if you're sticking through this class, I can see the numbers. It's not really, this isn't one of our most popular bangers. I hope you understand why this historical setting is so important to me. And I hope you'll understand why it should be important to you. The historical setting that the Old Testament comes into is very important to understanding the Old Testament. So is the historical setting of the New Testament. The New Testament didn't enter a vacuum. It entered a world that's already got a lot of history. So it's going to ask the believer to change, to move. That, for the believer who is spiritually hungry, that's excitement and hope. To the one who's clinging to the material earthly world, let me execute this guy. Wait a minute. It's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
It's also why he had so much trouble getting the apostles to understand what they were seeing as they lived with him. He had to move them from the material focus to the spiritual first, then material.
But yeah, that's really obvious. like I was listening to an interview yesterday on a podcast, and that's kind of what the concept they were talking about is this, how the disciples really, or the apostles actually had issues getting this stuff and such, and their struggles and that kind of thing. And you know, I I understand because it
Well, I've had brothers
one of the problems
viciously.
we have is, the importance of what we're talking about today is there's so much in the New Testament, and I mean, same goes for the Old Testament, that's not said, that's just inferred that you already know it
Yes,
because of the audience in which they're engaging. They expect them to know certain things and be familiar with certain things. And if we don't know those things
especially
in our
Paul.
day, then we can get off course so quickly. And that's why Paul is so hard to understand, because he assumes his listeners know so much. He he basically, I guess, if you could say Paul had a fault, the fault would be he expected everybody to be a Pharisee like him and to understand all the stuff that he had learned under the feet of Gamaliel.
I know somebody who gets
And
accused of being arrogant because he makes that same mistake all the time.
yeah. And so if we don't study and understand, where he came from and what his knowledge base was and how he's trying to communicate these things, we're gonna get it wrong.
Yes,
And that's why it takes work to
and
try to understand some of this stuff.
I have been viciously attacked by brothers for over spiritualizing the scriptures and not
Mhm.
taking things literal enough.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
If you understand spiritual first, then you'll see the earth reflections. But
oh
if you're
gosh,
trying
as
to
I'm
understand the spiritual through an imperfect earth reflection, you're never going to understand the spiritual.
yeah, the more
The
I'm studying
spiritual is the
lately,
ideal.
yeah, the more I'm studying lately and what Yahweh's showing me as I'm going along is, gosh, that's that is our nature, I guess, as humans, to want to tie everything to this physical earthly life that we're living, because it's what we live every day. It's what we experience every day, and that we can kind of test a lot of the physical things fairly easily. The spiritual ones, and I guess that's where the faith aspect comes in, is we
Have no
can't
fear.
necessarily test all those things, at least not in the same manner as we do the physical things. And there's a level of trust that we have to have there. And that's really what Yahweh is trying to get us to do, is to trust him, that those things that we don't quite see and don't quite fully understand, that he's got that, that
Yeah.
don't worry about that stuff. He's got that. And we try to say, oh, no. I've got to take this and I got to do what I got to do with this and I got to do it my way. And whenever we do that, we screw it up
And
over and
that's the
over and over
world
and over and over
Messiah
again.
enters. The people were done waiting. They were ready to take things
Yes.
into their own
That's
hands
They were
and
trying to
launch
make
another
him
revolt.
king because
Yep.
they wanted what they wanted, what they thought was supposed to happen. They were trying to, that's exactly why he got killed. Is that
Yes.
the Pharisees and Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, that they were trying to secure their positions and secure their role in the political and socioeconomic roles that they were in, because they were in fear of their jobs and their careers and everything else. And that's why they ultimately, had him crucified, because he was threatening to overturn all of that. At least that's what they thought he was trying to do,
If you
because that's what the
have,
people thought he was going to do.
yes,
It wasn't necessarily what he said he was going to do. It's what the people thought he was going to do.
Yes.
Because of
Now,
this, what you're talking about today, this historical,
context.
cultural context in which these things were happening.
Now I'm going to end with this, and just stay there, Charlie. If I'm using the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, okay, cosmic geography. If you have more of an affinity for this world than the spiritual world, then who's your king, according to Scripture?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the ruler of this material world?
The Satan.
Yeah. So that if you are more aligned with the material than the spiritual, you have put yourself in the kingdom of Satan, not Yahweh.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is we've got to choose,
Spiritual
choose ye
first,
this day whom ye will serve.
Yeah, then conquer this material kingdom of Satan by making disciples of the nations. Because as the nations become disciples, they will switch over to Yahweh and his Messiah, and robbing the strong man. And that's exactly what the Messiah meant. He's going to rob Satan's kingdom, but first he has to bind the strong man. That's what he does in the book of Revelations. He wraps a chain around him, casts him in the pit. He binds them from deceiving people. He makes it so that you can spiritually understand the gospel message and respond to it. So when Satan is loosed, he will make it impossible for the world, for most of the world, to hear and respond to the gospel message. He'll deceive them.
Right. Our job has not changed since Adam.
Nope.
Because Adam was commanded to make this world like Eden. Like Eden, to make the whole world like Eden. That is what we are to do.
And that commandment came before Satan.
We can't necessarily do it all on our own, but we can influence our circle of influence, and creating that Eden within our circle of influence the best that we can in the environment in which we live. That's our challenge.
And Noah was given the same order.
Yes. And the way he had to do it was build an ark and bring his family in there and try to teach them the best he could. And then, kicked them out of the ark and said, go make this better. And they, of course, we screwed it up again, but we screwed it up again, but that's the way it goes.
Let's get ourselves out of here. Tomorrow we will be back in Genesis, and we're going to cover where we left off all the way up to chapter 47. So we'll do quite a bit of work tomorrow. And then Friday we'll be in J.H. Allen's book, the next chapter of that book, The Scepter and the Birthright. And I don't know what Charlie's doing Monday. We'll find out. He'll let us know between now and then, because I don't think he's figured it out just yet. It's going to come to find out that I know this is small potatoes and small fry, but when you're not doing a one show a week program, when you're doing 5 days a week like we try to do, that's not an easy chore, Jack. Not if you're going to put something out worth listening to, worth other people's time. You got to put a little meat and potatoes in it. He's finding out that's a little bit of work. So he's going, what do I talk about? He'll figure it out. Charlie's smart. He's got it. We thank you for being here. We hope that we are edifying you, helping you grow and understand in your understanding of Yahweh, the Messiah, his word, our faith, the walk we're in. Hopefully it'll strengthen your faith and help you to cling to that walk to the very end, our path, our run our race to the end. To the extent that we help you better understand things, praise be to Yahweh, his Son, and his Spirit. To the extent that we miss the mark, blame me. Yeah, blame me. Don't blame Charlie. He gets blamed for enough. Otherwise, we thank you. If you got any comments, suggestions, corrections, email us, admin@wewhoarelost.com. If you're correcting us, all we ask is for the scripture so we can go test it ourselves. Otherwise, we hope to see you tomorrow, if not Friday, or until we see you again. Y'all stay safe. Yahweh bless. We love you. Bye-bye.